Hidden in the Heartland.
Hello, this is Kels Goodman, and this is our new Hidden in the Heartland podcast. Over the coming weeks and months, my friend Mark Burris and I will be starting up some discussions about the Heartland research. And we're also open to guests in the future. Our ultimate goal is to start up another season of Hidden in the Heartland. You know, you can watch all of the previous Heartland material on this YouTube channel for free. If you like what you see, please subscribe. We also invite you to help us financially by donating to our Give, Send, Go campaign, which is specifically for producing Season 3. And you can do that on the link below. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy this podcast. All right, well, good morning, and welcome to another episode of the Hidden in the Heartland podcast. This is Kels Goodman coming from Utah, and way on the other side of the galaxy over there is Mark Burris from New York. And so here on the Hidden the Heartland podcast, obviously what we do is we continue to ask the question, who was here long before Columbus? And is there a connection to the Book of Mormon? And so that's our search. And obviously some answers we can find and others we may never find. But the search is fun, and that's what matters. And so what I wanted to also remind you of is to subscribe to this channel if you find what we talk about interesting. It is new, and we are still growing. We're still kind of figuring things out technically and also what you want to hear. And so we hope to be able to keep this podcast growing. We are open always for comments. So comment on the comments below, or even just send me a message directly to tell us the kind of things you'd like to talk about. In the future, we'll probably do some Q&A episodes. So don't be afraid also to ask a question. Just be kind, be nice, because we know that sometimes this topic of Heartland, Mesoamerica, Baja California, where could the Book of Mormon have happened, can often be heated, but our goal is not to necessarily convince you or to convert you, but for us to just think about things and find it interesting. The real message of the Book of Mormon is to bring people to Christ, not to do all this archaeological research. But it is fun, and there's a lot in the Book of Mormon that is very topical, especially of our time. One of the things I wanted to go into today was I wanted to go into Poverty Point. And I'm curious, hey, Mark, have you ever been or heard of Poverty Point?
Poverty Point, to be honest, I've only heard it in passing. So yeah. That's a site I don't know a lot about. Haven't been there. I would like to go. Yeah. So all these different places that you've mentioned, I would like to see for myself and share, with my kids. So
yeah, I think that would be it's fun to get in the car and just start driving to some of these places. A lot of people talk about, I'm going to Europe to go see, this site, or I'm going, down south to go see this site down in Mexico or in Central America. And yet we forget that right here in America, right, where we live, we could get in the car and literally just go, in a few days drive, we can go see some of these sites and realize that there is definitely a lot to offer here in ancient America, especially on the eastern side in the Ohio River Valley, the Mississippi Valley, all this area between about Louisiana all the way up to New York and to Michigan. So these are some cool places. Poverty Point is obviously no different. Now, one week, I think it was last week, we talked a little bit about Cahokia and how cool Cahokia is and how large and how well preserved Cahokia is, even though much was lost. On the level of preservation, Cahokia was one of the better preserved places that you can find, and also well preserved and also well funded, which is nice. and that always helps. I would say the second, probably most well-preserved place would be Poverty Point. I was about to say PowerPoint, but forgive me for that slip of Microsoft fantasy going on there. But Poverty Point is actually an amazing place that actually does have a full-on visitors center, and it does have some financing. Poverty Point, just to kind of give you a location, Poverty Point is located in Louisiana, probably about northern Louisiana, and I served my mission in southern Louisiana. And so one time we went back to visit and my mission, and also I was able to take a separate trip and go up to Poverty Point. And I actually flew into Jackson, Mississippi, and just drove across the border right there to the northern part of Louisiana. And there's a river that's kind of near there. I forgot the name of the river. I should have written it down. It's a Cajun name. I think it's Mason, something Mason, Bayou Mason. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, I'll put it on the screen here. But it's a river that kind of connects eventually to the Mississippi River. So if, say, somebody came from another country, or they sailed in to the Gulf of Mexico, you could actually feasibly travel upstream through the Mississippi River and then divert off on this side river and end up at Poverty Point. So Poverty Point is definitely a place where commerce happened. And so I have some facts here from some videos that I've watched, and also from some books that I've read. I've kind of accumulated a few interesting pieces here that I think would be fascinating to look at Poverty Point. Now, this goes into also this discussion that I think me and Mark had last week, where we talked about dating. And we don't mean the kind where you're meeting girls at a singles ward. We're talking about, right, Mark? So we're talking about the kind that you're trying to take something and you want to know, how old is this thing? And that seems to be very complicated and not necessarily very exact, even though I believe that there are tools used to be able to find dating. But dating is done in so many different ways, and maybe one day we'll be able to do a future episode and maybe come up with some, maybe even bring a guest on or something where we can talk about dating as far as how dating works. Because we run into this discrepancy of, this is where religion and science actually does not mix. And that is how things are dated. And that's why we have to be very careful. Now, when we talked about Poverty Point last week, one of the things we went into was the dating of Poverty Point, saying that this place was heavily populated from, you remember that, is from 900 AD to about 1200 AD. And I kind of had this theory that I wonder if it was much earlier, i.e. Nephite time frame. And Nephite time frame obviously is 600 BC to 400 AD, and then their population really decreased by 421, and according to the text. So if that's the case, then Poverty Point wouldn't match. But the question also comes up, is their dating correct? I don't want to question it, like I don't want to be a negative nanny here, but I do want to ask, because now we're at Poverty Point, okay? So Poverty Point is during the period of the Archaic period. And I actually saw this in a document when they talked about the hill Cumorah, this kind of discussion about periods and years, why we run into this discrepancy of, if we're saying something is 2,000 years old, 3,000 years old, 4,000 years old, as religious people, we can believe it and we could take it. But once we start saying, oh, something was 8,000 years old, right? Then we'd be like, whoa, hey, wait a second. Or 8,000 BC, which is the Archaic period, which is 8,000 to 1,000 BC. And that's when Poverty Point was supposedly populated. And if that's the case, is that dating wrong? Is it all of a sudden wrong when it goes beyond the creation? Or is it right after the creation? Are all the numbers correct afterwards, and are they wrong beforehand? And that's where, I'm hoping we can kind of figure that out. I remember a document I read. I didn't bring it with me, but there's a document I read from BYU. It was 2004, and it was a discussion about the hill Cumorah and what the hill Cumorah was. So I'm going to divert to the hill Cumorah for just a moment. So the hill Cumorah is what's known as a drumlin. Now, a drumlin is a hill that's created from a lot of water being on the land, or ice at one point, and then the ice melting or the water receding, and the drumlin is kind of shaped like a big teardrop. We kind of talked about, and thus, and then we personally believe that the hill Cumorah was a drumlin at first, but then through time, somebody came in and messed with it and put the plates in it and the other room. And you can look for that discussion in a previous episode. But the point is, in the document I read from BYU talking about the hill Cumorah being a drumlin, it went from a discussion about what the hill Cumorah was to then it went into all of these millions of years ago kind of dating. And I have to raise kind of a red flag and go, I'm not poo-pooing when people start talking about dating into the millions of years. But if we're talking about the Book of Mormon happening 1,000 years, 2,000 years ago, and now we're switching into talking about something being millions of years ago, do we believe it? Is there a discrepancy? Is that the creation? Why did BYU in this document all of a sudden become cool and hip and start going into the millions of years and kind of negated the creation? The earth is, only, thousands of years, meaning maybe 12,000, 4,000, 7,000. We don't know exactly, but we know, but according to, church doctrine, or according to what we know, the dating is not, as much as we think it is. And so, I'm just going to throw that in the air because I'm sure that people have discussions about that. And I don't have an answer today. I'm just throwing that out to our audience, because when I get into Poverty Point, the dating is going to be a little off. And so I'm questioning all dating right now is what I'm doing. I'm just questioning, how, because of what we know religiously. And, but it was the creation millions of years, and that's the millions of years BYU is talking about. I don't know. Or are they just falling in line with the rest of the world when they talk about, non-creation, so to speak, long creation, millions of years. We were created out of, an amoeba, or the Big Bang. Where are we at BYU when it comes to that, or are we just nowhere? So anyway, so that's just sort of something I'm just throwing out as a point for everybody to start arguing over. You love that, don't we?
Lots of comments, and
that's right. Where's the dating? I'm not answering it. I'm just saying, if we know that certain things happen, if we know that Jesus was born in 1 AD, and we know that Adam fell in 4,000 BC, what does that say about everything else? And so we just have to ask that question. But anyway, Poverty Point was one of the older places in America. It's one of the oldest. Louisiana actually has some of the oldest. In fact, I think when we look at the research, we notice that from Louisiana on your way north, when you start going north past Cahokia and all the way up to New York and Michigan, you see the dates get younger and younger as they go north, according to their current way of dating. So Poverty Point, there's another place near Poverty Point called Watson Break. And Watson Break, you're not necessarily allowed there. It's like a circle of mounds at Watson Break. But because it's privately owned, supposedly the owners don't usually let people go on there and fool around like me. So I never got to go to Watson Break, but I did go to Poverty Point. So Poverty Point is, if you get a chance to look at it, go online and you can see the shape of Poverty Point, and it's basically probably like a big D-shaped piece of land that is about a quarter of a mile across from one side to the other, and it's these C-shaped rings, about 6 of them, almost like a stadium looking thing. If you've ever seen Burning Man in Nevada, and you can see Burning Man from the sky, you see it's almost shaped like Poverty Point. Burning Man is that event they have every year, and it's always at this place where they have this almost kind of like an arena looking shaped thing where everything's shaped in a C, shaped with a bunch of people at each line. This is kind of the same. Poverty Point has I think it's 6 rows, and each of those rows were really big. And some of those mounds have been flattened, but it's basically in each of the rows they have found houses on the or remains of houses on each of the rows, and they're very big. And so it's like I said, it's about a half a mile across. So I wanted to read a little bit about this and then give you a little more description of Poverty Point. So Poverty Point was actually discovered around 1830 by a guy named Jacob Walter, who was out looking for something else. I forgot I think he was looking for pits or something. And he ran into it and he saw it and realized that there was something here when it came to the mounds, because in the 1800s is when mounds were really starting to be discovered. People were starting to put 2 and 2 together that this was an ancient civilization. And later, some people theorized that Poverty Point was a community that, according to the elements that they have found, that was probably second in as far as in size of people under Cahokia. Like Cahokia would have been the largest, and Poverty Point would have been one, kind of second, like maybe 10,000 people might have lived there. And they claimed that one theory in the 1950s came that the people in Poverty Point were actually a theocracy, like they were a religious group that lived there for a while, because they were all steeped in some kind of religion, because there are some little elements of religion there, like worshiping a sun god, like you see at Cahokia. And then some other foreign group came in and kind of took over and forced the people who lived at Poverty Point to build those enormous mounds, because those mounds would have taken a long time. So there's a lot of discrepancies as far as who they were, because they did not find a lot of farming near these mounds. And because there was not a lot of farming, that meant whoever lived there were hunter-gatherers rather than, people who farmed, which was odd, because to build some of those mounds would have taken a long time. So they say that some of the mounds are about dated from 1700 to 1300 BC. Would have been the high point of the mound build, which would probably be, what's that, Jaredite time frame, probably. And so so that would be a possibility. What they call the woodhenge, not woodhenge, I'm sorry, it's the Archaic period. I'm sorry, I got that mixed up. Not the woodland period, but the Archaic period. And so the latter end of the Archaic period. So they built these huge mounds that would have taken a long time, but later they theorized that the mounds were probably built much faster. Like Cahokia, the monk's mound, the mound was in layers. So when they would do a dig into the mound, they would find that every few feet, the materials were different. Like the way the dirt was laid on there would be different. So you'd know that Monk's Mound was built in sections. It was built in different time frames, and it took a long time because it was a lot of dirt. This one, they theorized, happened all at once. Now, in the middle of Poverty Point, there's one single mound. I forgot the name of it. They just call it Mound A. And it's, at one point they thought it might have been a bird because it kind of shaped like an effigy of a bird in the middle. But it's pretty high. It's about 50 feet high. And to put that in perspective, the Cahokia's Monk's Mound is 100 feet high. So this is about a half the size of Monk's Mound, but is still very large and at its high point. And so Mound A on Poverty Point, when they did a survey of that mound, they found that mound could have been built in a lot shorter time because all the materials were the same. And not only that, because they were hunter-gatherers, they didn't necessarily live there while building this mound, even though they did find evidences of, like I said, homes on all of the C-shaped mounds. So somehow these people that lived in Poverty Point or were around Poverty Point weren't farming. And so they just built this mound, this big mound, and they did it in a short period of time. And that's one of the theories why they feel like it was forced, because they felt like they were just doing it just to do it, because some outside force came in, took over Poverty Point, and forced the locals to build this huge mound. So anyway, so these were some of the interesting points. It also could have been, the mounds also had an alignment to north and south. So like a lot of mounds, that there was a certain scientific, way of sizing them and building them. So these people were not like ignorant. They weren't totally ignorant. They knew mostly what they were doing. The other thing that you can find at Poverty Point is a woodhenge. So what's a woodhenge? A woodhenge is basically, in this case, is a circle of wood. It's basically a circle where each place a wooden stick, not stick, but like a log, like a size of a telephone pole or something, would have been placed in a circle in an effort to be able to almost act as a clock or like a sundial or a way to align to the sun and the moon and the stars. Now, Cahokia has the same one. We forgot last week to talk about that, but Cahokia also has a woodhenge, much larger woodhenge there, but where you can put up all the sticks, and then if you stand at a certain place, a certain time, and the sun hits at a certain time, you know that it's this time of year, and kind of like Serpent's Mound. So have you, Mark, had you ever been to Serpent's Mound? You know about Serpent's Mound, right?
I've heard about it, and I've seen a lot of both like documentaries for Heartland and for like America Unearthed and whatnot. So I've seen a lot about it. I've never been out there.
Yeah, America Unearthed had a good piece on Serpent's Mound. That was and we even covered Serpent's Mound too in one of our episodes. We did one called Archaeoastronomy, and you can see how a lot of land masses are used to be able to tell the moon and the sun risings and settings. So that's what these wood henges would be used for. And Poverty Point just happens to have one. It's funny because when you go there now, the holes where the planks would have gone are now filled with buckets. So you go there and you see buckets in a circle, and so they're not tall enough to be able to tell where the sun is hitting, is high enough. But originally, they show that that's originally what it would have looked like. They
Have
also
they
what's that?
did they find a lot of artifact at Poverty Point?
Oh yeah, you know what? That's a good point. Yeah, let me talk about that. Yeah, there's actually a visitor center there at Poverty Point, and they have the artifacts. It's not as big as Cahokia, but it's a nice visitor center, and they have these artifacts all through there. So some of the artifacts they had was first off, there was like no stone tools seen anywhere in from their excavations. And so they just so how they did everything, it was hard to tell. But one of the things,
Probably wooden spoons,
that's it. They just used wooden spoons and they just dug everything up,
or it was aliens.
it was totally aliens, yeah. Or they just used buckets that they got at Walmart, or whatever, and or they drove one of those big plows, to just put them all up there. Something happened. We just don't know. We don't have any evidence, but but there was one interesting thing that they did find, and that was what they call cooking balls. Have you ever heard of cooking balls before?
Um, did Wayne didn't have those in his collection, did he?
I think he did. I think one of them was a cooking. I think he did have a cooking
Yeah,
ball. There's the ball. There's the type of balls that you use to like play with or think through, or like a spiritual aspect to a
meditation.
ball.
Yeah,
Yeah, but this one was different. This was a cooking ball, kind of, I think, made of the same stuff. It was a clay substance that was formed. But what they did was they found ovens that were in the ground in a lot of the places, a lot of the circled mounds in Poverty Point, and in these holes, there were ovens, and in the ovens were these cooking balls. So what they would do is it kind of acted like charcoal, where they would get the balls, hot through cooking, and then they could keep their food warm with the balls. So the balls kind of acted like charcoal keeping their food warm. And so they found a lot of cooking balls. And so you can see those cooking balls on display at the place. You can also see pottery. Pottery is a big sign of what was there, pottery with designs on them. And also you can see elements again of their religion, sun goddess type stuff, very similar to Cahokia. And here's the other amazing thing that was at Poverty Point that they denoted, that they actually, out of all those mounds so far at this point in time, they have found no burials. And so they didn't know whether everybody was cremated or if they just didn't stick around. So one way or another, there is very little as far as any kind of, but there's been no burials found. So there's no farming, no burials, and no layers on each of the mounds. So somehow these guys came, built their stuff, and split, or something like that. And that they, like I said, they think that they built the mound. In fact, they theorized that big main mound, that they would have built it in like 90 days. And I don't know
wow.
how. Maybe they brought the elephants in and did a lot of the work. I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows?
So it's interesting to me, like they're hunter gatherers, but then they have these, they have these cooking balls and these, they have these ovens, and like on one side it's like, well, they weren't very sophisticated because they weren't farmers, but they built this mound in 90 days and they have these ovens. It's just kind of weird.
Yeah, it is. It's really fascinating. Yeah, Poverty Point is filled with mystery, and I know that their stuff is still ongoing. And the staff, when I went down there, the staff were really nice. They were very open for. They themselves admitted they're still learning and trying to figure out more about Poverty Point. But the elements that they did find did, like I said, put the dating around 17 to 1300 BC. Watson Break, the one that's nearby, is also set for being a little older than that one, which making those two some of the oldest in the United States. There's another one on the LSU campus. So if you ever visit the LSU campus, Louisiana State University, there's actually a couple of mounds that are there that you can go visit. So
these sites that you speak of, like Poverty Point and Cahokia, are they continually digging, or are they done? They're like, oh, we found everything we're gonna find.
No, they're continually digging, and even Cahokia is still digging. They're still going at it. When we were there last, they were getting ready to do another dig. I think we were there last in 2018, and that was also the same year I went to Poverty Point, and they were still going at it, and so they were still trying to find what they could. And I know that makes it very difficult to preserve it and not destroy it, but still go in. And so when they do their digs, they do them very carefully so they don't, that there's a respect, that they try to create when they're digging, because you never know if they do find a body, if they do find a skeleton that's just like, it's sort of a big red flag is raised, and because then somebody has to claim it. We have to know who is this person that was buried. And so in the old days, in the 1800s, the laws were not as rigid as they are today as far as what you can dig and and find. But
have they used LiDAR at either of those sites? Do you know?
That's a good question.
LiDAR?
I don't know. I think LiDAR, I know LiDAR was used in Cahokia. In fact, I think it was LiDAR that helped them find that 2.5 miles worth of the covering around Cahokia, the what do you call it? The barrier.
The trench, whatever you want to.
The place where they had a big wooden fence all around it, for protection, defense. That's what it is. They did find that via, I think, LiDAR. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. But Poverty Point, I don't know what they have found as far as LiDAR is concerned. So, but anyway, well, that's Poverty Point. So when you get a chance, go down to Louisiana and go check it out, and you might be surprised. Thank you, Mark Burris from back east. And this is Kels Goodman. I'm in Utah, and we are excited. You can also watch all the other videos on this channel as well, Hidden in the Heartland. So thank you for joining us today.